the grand finale of the most ambitious X-Men event ever. Let's get into it. Thanks for joining me. My name is Daryl. I am the host of Read Your Comics, and I have been doing a week-to-week read-through of the Age of Apocalypse for its 30th anniversary. I'm finally at the end. Technically, this book would have been released a week ago, but just for the sake of these videos, I wanted to give it its own video to really absorb everything kind of coming to a head. So we had 8 titles, not counting the X Universe and X-Men Chronicles, that all culminated with this as the capstone to the whole thing. And just like X-Men Alpha, we've got a nice wraparound foily cover here, or chromium as it was called. And if I'm not mistaken, this was kind of Marvel's first kind of money grab on these titles. I guess they're one-shots, really, but there was Alpha and Omega. They did it again over in the Spider-Man books for some clone stuff. I think they did one that wasn't necessarily for a crossover, but they tried to like combine the different Marvel groups into their own little corners with different, editors over everything, and all of them kind of had their own like thing. There was the X-Men group, the Spider-Man group, the Avengers group, and it was called Marvel Edge. I know there's like a Marvel Edge Alpha or something like that that had a chromium cover that had a little bit of Hulk, a little bit of Punisher, I think Ghost Rider. It was like a weird grouping. Anyway, but X-Men Alpha and Omega set the stage for Marvel to do that, to get a little more out of your wallet by making these special one-shots that would kind of cap off the whole thing. And in fact, we're not even really done with X-Men, because after this, there's X-Men Prime that comes out after this, which reestablishes the proper timeline. So if anything came out of this for a good bit, it was definitely Marvel's marketing department. And of course, wrapping it in this chromium cover was just an excuse to charge like $4 for it at a time when most books were $2. So get double the price and a fancy shiny cover out of it. I do like the cover though. John Romita Jr., who wasn't too far removed from his own X-Men run at this point. I mean, I think he'd only been off of the book for maybe 5 or 6 months before the Age of Apocalypse started. So I guess getting close to a year at this point, but like I said, not too far removed from it. Having him step in for this big wraparound cover is pretty nice. He does not do the interior though. We get Roger Cruz doing his best Joe Mad to top it all off. And I'm just going to go ahead and say up front, I like it. Roger Cruz did a good job on this issue. He also did the Alpha book interiors, and he helped fill in on, I believe it was the Excalibur series. I think he filled in for an issue. So overall, Roger Cruz definitely making his presence felt throughout the whole event. And before I jump into it, I just want to give a quick reminder. If you've missed any of the previous weeks, be sure to hit up the playlist right there. I read each week's worth of books as they were coming out 30 years ago. So if you've been following along this whole journey, you kind of saw it in very much the same way as if New Comic Book Day had just dropped these books in your lap. But if you're new to the channel or just haven't done so already, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. And before you leave, be sure to drop a like so the algorithm knows to put this in front of other comic fans. Let's go ahead and jump on in. These chromium covers didn't really have an interior cover. They hadn't figured out quite how to do that. You just see the metal embossing on the inside. Anyway, to catch up on this event, let's see. Magneto had been captured in the 3rd month, and we had seen him kind of being tortured by Apocalypse during a couple issues throughout the 4th month. And that's what we're going to pick up on. Here's Magneto kind of trying to put up a fight. They've put him in a nice black jumpsuit here, kind of reminiscent of Superman when he first returned from the dead, right? So here it is again. Magneto putting up a little bit of a fight. You can't really tell who he's fighting here, but it ends up being Holocaust, the Horseman. Mostly Holocaust was in the Astonishing title. Mark Waid returns for dialogue on this. He was there for X-Men Alpha and through the Legion quest that started off the whole event, but then he kind of faded away. But here he is back again, just on dialogue. As I said, Roger Cruz, Scott Lobdell doing the bulk of the story. And then you got a handful of inkers from La Rosa, Townsend, Kessel, Candelario, Hanna, and Milgram. So good amount of inkers working on this. They had to get it out at a certain time. So here you see it's Holocaust, and he's just kind of smacking Magneto around, grabbing him by the long hair, just trying to make him feel as powerless as possible. Apocalypse chilling on his throne, just kind of watching the torturing going on, and taunting Magneto that he's only keeping him alive because he knows his X-Men are coming and he wants to kill them in front of Magneto, just to reiterate how hopeless the whole situation is. Magneto, of course, is saying, "You're fooling yourself if you think the X-Men are coming for me. They know better than that." But here's where Apocalypse is going to reveal that he has the Imcron crystal, or the slice of it that Gambit brought back, and he is growing it inside of this other chamber here. And he mentions how he knows now about the other timeline and everything involved with that. He's not about to let his ragtag team of mutants change the world into a place that he wasn't the ruler of. Now, in this instance, I was thinking like, oh, is Apocalypse now deciding that he's going to go into the timeline and attack the other world either, this Apocalypse? But he really doesn't want to. He's really just content with his own timeline here. No need to, cross over and dominate another one. But he's just not going to let them reverse it and end this one. The other looming threat throughout this is there is an attack coming from the Human High Council from Europe. That was taking place in the Weapon X title mostly, and it's headed towards North America. Meanwhile, Apocalypse is also planning his own retaliation strike on Europe, so this is also the brink of nuclear war going on right here, where there is going to be no real winner. Of course, Magneto feels pretty despondent when he realizes that Apocalypse does have the Imcron crystal and that the X-Men will be coming for that. Angel, who has kind of tried to play neutral throughout this whole storyline, he's going to get his hero moment in this final issue. We see some of these troll characters that were in the Generation Next book. They only appeared in that one, but Cruz decided to pull them out again and show them in this book. So that's a pretty good touch to call back to that, because we didn't see those kind of creatures that Chris Bachalo was drawing in the Generation Next book in any of the other titles. So to see them being used for another purpose throughout this world is it brings it together a little bit better, because that book, because of the art style, which I loved, felt a little disconnected from the rest of the event. So first, Angel's going to go rescue Karma, who was his, I guess, second in command at his little Heaven nightclub. Sideways page, gotta have a sideways page. And here's our X-Men team. Everybody but no Sabretooth. No Sabretooth in this. You can really see where Roger Cruz was definitely leaning into what Joe Mad had been bringing to Uncanny X-Men at this point, and the popularity that was growing into. I mean, look at these mouths on all these characters. You got Blink in the foreground leading the charge. Well, it's her teleportation thing that they're using to get inside the Citadel here. Jubilee looks a little suspect there. Kitty in an interesting pose, jumping forward. And we're going to have some pretty big emotional moments throughout this book. They arrive on the scene and realize something already has happened here. There's already been a takedown of everything. And as they're trying to figure out what's going on, they find Henry McCoy, the Dark Beast, has been pulled out of some rubble. And he explains how in the Factor X book, the pens had been overrun by the prisoners, and he thought he could handle them, but he kind of got beat down in the process. Meanwhile, we also have Scott and Jean, who have teamed up, and they are leading the prisoners from the pen out, trying to get them to safety. I don't know where they think they're going, because Jean knows that there are nuclear bombs getting ready to rain down on them. And then we see a mysterious cloaked figure in the back, and it's Havoc, who we thought got kind of knocked out and taken out in Factor X number 4. But of course, he's going to come after Cyclops, his brother, for one final showdown. And here's Angel's big hero moment. You see him flying above, and he's dodging and weaving through the fire of these infinites, and he essentially sacrifices himself to take out the like security force field or whatever that was protecting Apocalypse's security grid. And because Angel had kind of been this neutral figure that nobody really fully trusted throughout it, there's some pretty good narration here. And I guess this is where Mark Waid comes into it about how he won't be mourned, but his final act will allow a new player to enter the game. Good transition to bring in X-Man. So again, we're bringing all these books from the whole event into focus here for the penultimate confrontation. This character shows up and he's shouting no, and he says that the Southwest Kingdom, it exists no longer. It's gone, all gone. Apocalypse seems a little surprised by this, and he refers to that character as the Shadow King. Now, the last time we saw the Shadow King was in Avalon in Excalibur number 4. So I guess the Shadow King escaped that. The character Switchback, who I don't think appears in this, now that I'm looking back, Switchback and Mystique just kind of disappear. So they were part of this group, but even when Nightcrawler showed up in the Amazing X-Men, it was just him and Destiny, who he's got right there. So Mystique and the Switchback character and Damask, who were part of this Excalibur team, just they're done. They were in that book, and then they don't show up in any of the other books. So kind of a gap there of continuity, because they all survived together. Why would they have not at least make a cameo in the side, right? They didn't even do that. What they're relaying here is that the nuclear strike from the Human High Council is underway, and it's wiped out part of Apocalypse's kingdom already. So initially, Apocalypse is going to kind of throw his tantrum and start taking it out on Magneto when all of a sudden he gets blasted and flung to the side. And here's where X-Man comes in, Nate Gray. And Magneto recognizes him immediately. The very mutant Forge promised he would someday deliver to me. In the 4th issue of X-Man, when Forge is killed, he does say to seek out Magneto and all that. So you knew that Forge had a connection, but you didn't really know that Magneto knew that Forge was kind of preparing this telekinetic mutant to be a big player in this war in the future. Fortunately, Magneto's helmet was nearby for him to put it on. And then lots of throwdown here. This is where we're going to get some of those big moments as the X-Men battle their way towards the M'Kraan crystal. Colossus wants to go with his little sister Illyana, and Destiny, who looks into the crystal and sees the other timeline and all the different things that happen in the facets of the crystal, says no, only Illyana and Bishop and I can do this because we're the only ones that don't have a counterpart in this other timeline. And we're like, what? Why would that be? Oh. Which, of course, that sets Colossus off. He's not happy with the idea that in this other timeline that they're trying to restore, he realizes his sister is dead. Which, again, relatively newer event in the history of the X-Men. That probably happened around like 92 or so. This is 95. So within the last 3 years of X-Men stories. And then all of a sudden we see Holocaust and Nate come crashing through a glass upper level of some sort, making a big entrance. And of course, it's like right on top of the X-Men. I guess they were looking down onto the M'Kraan crystal from Apocalypse's chamber. And pretty good narration too here with Rogue saying like she doesn't know the young man, but instantly realizes whose side he's on. So she goes to help when Magneto shows up, and they kind of have their little quick reunion here. When Rogue realizes, she's like, what do we do? Give us your orders. And he's like, nope, no more orders to give. This is the end game. We're right at the end. There's nothing really left to tell you to do. It's almost like just go survive, do your best. And he has a little chat with Illyana, who doesn't look quite as tiny. She's small, like a child to Magneto, but it's not like when Colossus holds her in his hand and she's like a little tiny action figure size. So Magneto has his heart to heart with her and kind of tells her what to do. She doesn't know Magneto. This is new to her, right? She'd been in these pens. She had been rescued by her brother that she thought was dead. She doesn't even realize she has mutant powers. So she doesn't quite know what needs to be done. And she's asking Magneto to kind of assure her that whatever she has to do in this other timeline, is it safe? Is it a safe place? Is there no hate and pain and suffering in the world? Which, of course, it's not a perfect world for the X-Men, and they only know kind of what they've gleaned from Bishop. And Bishop gives his speech about how I can promise you everything might not be perfect, but there is hope, unlike here, that is a hopeless world. And thus, Ilyana agrees to do whatever she has to do. Meanwhile, there's plenty more of these like trolls and infinite soldiers around, so we're just going to have more of a battle raging on. You've got Kitty flipping around with her claws sticking out. Here's Sabretooth and Wildchild making an appearance. They don't play a big part in the end of this, but I thought it was weird that they weren't shown in that teleporting in scene. Then we've got Jean and Scott again, and she's sensing that the bombs are starting to drop. Here comes Weapon X Wolverine, just able to land where she is. Now they have a psychic connection, so it's like he kind of probably had a sense or a feeling where to jump, where to try to land to arrive near her. Otherwise, it would seem kind of odd that he was able to be right where she was going to be, right? Back over here for some more Holocaust and X-Man having a battle here. He's getting blasted in the chest. First time we've seen his power being used, like little invisible bubbles shooting out. So I'm not sure there was a good communication on how that was supposed to be represented. At what point was Roger Cruz given this assignment to start working on this book versus what was happening within the issues? I mean, he obviously had the character designs, but for this particular character, and this is how we're going to see Nate's powers kind of shooting out the whole time, other than the little energy coming off his eye. But that's not how it was represented by Steve Scroce in the other book. And he blasts Holocaust and basically calls Holocaust a loser. So I guess he wins here. Here's some more of those like multi-headed troll things like Bacalo created. So he at least saw those. He was looking at the Bacalo pages, right? And here's the Sugar Man, who we saw in the Generation Next book, had hitched a ride on Colossus at the end of the 4th issue. We didn't really know what he was up to, but now he's like hopping off and he's going to jump right into the crystal. And it even says some think he's not smart, but he knows a lost cause when he sees one, and without pause dives into the heart of the crystal. And now Colossus starts to go a little crazy. He says if he's to die this day, he's going to do it by his sister. Iceman tries to slow him down, and Colossus just rips right through him, completely shattering him. Now, we know from an earlier issue that Iceman can kind of reconstitute himself. It just takes him a little effort. So it's not like Colossus killed him in this moment, but he did not hesitate to rip right through him. Gambit is going to then slow Colossus down because he's worried that if Colossus tries to go in there to be with his sister, he's going to mess the whole thing up. Think of like, Peter Quill trying to pull off the Infinity Gauntlet in Infinity War. And he was so hung up on Gamora that he messed the whole thing up and they weren't able to get the Infinity Gauntlet. That's kind of what is happening here with Colossus. He's about to muck it all up. So Gambit steps in and blasts him in the back. Here we're seeing more images of the proper timeline. Destiny explains to Ilyana that you do have a power in this other timeline, and I'm going to kind of share what I can sense here, and it'll awaken your power that'll help you travel through time via the Imcron to return Bishop back to the point where Professor X gets killed by his son. Human High Council, they're dying. They're dead. That's all you really need to know about that page. And here comes Magneto with his final confrontation with Apocalypse. Pretty good layout here overall. I like this pulling the metal up. Whatever he does to it makes it turn red, so his color scheme continues to match. And he puts on like this suit of armor. to go take on Apocalypse. And then they're just going to go at it pretty much for the rest of the issue. I like this. I like the way he's got the face and shadow, the anime style of it is it's very engaging, particularly for this time period of the mid 90s. There needed to be something new going on. I think Joe Mad really brought it in. Roger Cruz able to emulate it and do a pretty good job of it. He was able to still get a lot of the same layouts and stuff. And just as he's getting the upper hand on Apocalypse, Strong Guy shows up with his son, and we saw Strong Guy turned heel at the end of the Externals issue that we read last week. Now Jean's trying to hold back the nuclear bombs. Wolverine shows up and he's trying to get to her, but Havoc shoots her in the back at the last minute, and he must unleash a pretty heavy blast because ultimately it kills Jean over here. Cyclops, of course, is furious because, well, one, he loves Jean too, and he realizes she was the only thing holding the bombs back. You've doomed us all. And then they just kind of shoot at each other. I don't know if Havoc kind of gets the best of him because this is kind of the end moment for Cyclops, but it seems like Havoc does win. But then you see Snicked, and he falls, and there is Logan ending Havoc's run in the storyline. So this is the payoff, right? There's got to be some like big dying moments here, and he goes and says his goodbye to Jean, and that's your emotional moment between those two. I think that was the last we see of Cyclops too. So he must have been killed in that moment. Finally, we get Bishop back in time. There he is, running over to stop Legion from stabbing. Well, he's trying to stab Magneto in the past, but Xavier jumps in the middle, and he gets stopped by himself. Like, why would Bishop in the past try to stop this Bishop from stopping this at all? I think it was just to have this moment, I think. Now, little janky over here. The last we saw Beast, they were kind of dragging him along just to keep an eye on him in their assault on the Apocalypse's Citadel. But somehow they got into this room where there's a teleportation device, and we see Dark Beast has he must have done something to morph that he was able to jump into this teleportation device. He's trying to just get away. He just like kind of like Sugar Man. He knows his exit when he sees one. Quicksilver runs over and messes with it, which scrambles it all up. And Blink, I don't know if what they were doing here was meant to be. This almost looks like she's being hit with something, like she's in pain. But she's saying, "So much for seeing that furball ever again. You play dirty. I love it." And I'm not sure what's going on in this panel, the way it was drawn versus the dialogue that was put on it. Because it looks like she's getting hit with something here, the way like her pose is. But she's just saying, like, wow, you really scrambled his atoms up. And Quicksilver's like, well, I wasn't really trying to do it to punish him, but he was set those coordinates to the center of the Mcron crystal. So I was really just trying to prevent him from getting in there and messing that up. Colossus is still going wild, and we're gonna have a crazy moment here. Remember, Colossus left his team to die. He saved Ilyana, and he went back to go try to save him from the core, the power plant of Apocalypse's world here. It was being overrun by those trolls and stuff, and they left their teenage team to die. So this isn't the noble, honorable Colossus that we all love, right? He's got some hidden anger issues, clearly, and now he's coming to basically attack Gambit to punish him for stopping him from getting to Ilyana. Kitty jumps in to stop him, and the dialogue is saying, as Shadowcat moves to block her husband, she trusts that their love will protect her. She trusts that he will never hurt her. She trusts him to stop, and that's why she doesn't phase, and he stomps all over her, killing Kitty. Colossus killing Kitty, kind of by accident. He probably thought she was going to phase and he was going to run right through her, but he stomps her and then is immediately overcome with the guilt and grief of what he just did. Gambit takes the opportunity to blast him in the back, I guess using as much power as he can. And it says shredded metal becomes shredded flesh as he turns back to his human form for the last time. And that's when Ilyana comes back. See, they've already sent Bishop back, so kind of her job is done. And she comes back and holds his hand, or starts to, but Quicksilver has to snatch her up and kind of relates to her about losing a sibling and asks what he said to her. And he said he was scared. And she says, "And now I am too." This is pretty action packed, right? We got to go back and forth, because now we're back to the strong guy with his child, and Rogue shows up and ends that pretty quick. She saps up all of his energy, and she's like, "Do you want it back?" And she gives it to him and kills him. She kills Strong Guy. A lot of death in this. We saw Iceman get exploded. I think he would have come back. Now Kitty's dead, both by Colossus. Who else have we seen die so far? We just saw Strong Man die. Nothing's off the table in this ending of an event. So she's able to save her child at least. And now Apocalypse goes and he gets the original shard. So I guess he took off a little other piece of the Mkron crystal to grow the bigger thing that we saw them go into. Nate returns and gets the drop on Apocalypse, making him drop the shard, and he's able to grab it. And then he starts fighting Apocalypse again, too. Meanwhile, back in the past, once again, we see Age of Apocalypse Bishop. He kind of punches himself so that he can run over, and he says, "David." And Legion says, "Who knows my name?" Which makes him pause from what he was about to do. AOA Bishop runs over, grabs his psychic blade that he still has like sticking out of his hand, and jabs it into himself. And Bishop's power, is to like absorb the power of others and just release it as energy, not in the same way that Rogue absorbs powers, but like he can just take in energy, right? And so he kind of does it, and he sends the feedback loop, which makes Legion realize what's going to happen for the whole event if he was able to carry through. And in this feedback, it makes him, I guess, die. I guess it kills Legion in the process. And he says, "And with that, I'm going to fade away too. Like we're going to fade away together in all memory of your screw up, of the crime you committed." And here's our normal Storm and normal Iceman who were there too. And, you know, they're not going to be stuck in the past. They got to go back to their own timeline. So with Legion's death, they get swept up and sent back into their present day. And they're left here confused about what all happened. See, here's another scene of like a face being made that I'm not sure what she's saying was supposed to go with this facial expression. Because she looks mad, but she's not like really saying like she's mad. She's saying, "I'm not sure what happened here. I feel is a loss, almost maternal, that I can't explain." But that doesn't look like a face that goes with that dialogue. So there's some places Roger Cruz, kind of some wonkiness. Here's our X-Man invisible bubbles that he's shooting. I mean, I guess they have to display it in a different way somehow, although Magneto's power is like blue energy, and his energy in the other books was like that red, almost like fire energy that comes off of him, like kind of like this. And they're both turning on Apocalypse, hitting him as hard as they can. Here comes Holocaust. Nate is going to take that shard of Mkron and jab it into Holocaust. Now it looks like Apocalypse is getting the drop on Magneto, and this is probably one of the best scenes in the whole entire event, where Apocalypse is relishing in his this like turn of events where now he is on the offensive, and Magneto's not really fighting back. He says, "Why won't you fight back?" "I can't. I'm concentrating." "What?" "No." And he rips Apocalypse in half. Almost thought about using that for the thumbnail, but went with just the cover instead. But yeah, this is one of the most impactful moments I felt like of the event back when I originally read this. At this point, we had seen Magneto like rip the adamantium out of Wolverine. We'd definitely seen him do some wild stuff with his powers, but to just rip someone in half, I mean, it's just kind of wild and insane to think about. It's a well composed page too. You see his face fall down, and he can't even talk, of course, but he is still in the process of dying in the moment. And we're going to wrap the whole event up with bombs dropping, Rogue and Magneto having a final moment with their son as everything turns to white hot and ashes, and the age of apocalypse comes to an end. So, of course, they would revisit the event periodically here and there, but this ending is kind of the end of the timeline. As far as I know, they have not revisited the event post this book. Every time they've gone back to it, they've done prequel stories that happened before X-Men Alpha. If I'm wrong about that, feel free to correct me, but the ones that I read, and I didn't even read all of them because I don't think the follow-ups were very good, but they were all in the prequel era. So I think this was a really good ending to the whole event. As a whole, the Age of Apocalypse is really like an extreme version of Days of Future Past. It takes that alternate timeline of a dystopian world, and really cranks it up to 12. So, of course, Days of Future Past was in the future, and this was meant to be an alternate present day timeline. But the principles of the world in which mutants live turned on its head because of some particular event in history, it's all still there. But of course, that original event took 2 issues to tell a story, and this one took like 34 issues to tell this big event story. Aspects of it I really enjoyed. I think you could get away with just reading the 2 bookend issues and really maybe just the 2 X-Men books, because the rest kind of gets explained to you enough that you would understand like the whole event. In the end, I do think it's worth reading the whole thing, though, because you do get those other aspects of the story kind of fleshed out. Gambit's role, even though I think that book kind of gets a little messy, I think reading at least the first issue of that to know what his mission is and just you could kind of assume from that point on is important. I think the X-Man title maybe isn't as integral, even though he shows up at the end and plays a vital role. All you really kind of need to get out of that is that he's a very powerful mutant that shows up to help fight Apocalypse. The Generation Next book, that one, because of the Chris Bacalo art in it alone, is one of the best. And I think it does have one of the best endings of like a high stakes, emotional moment, high impact conclusion. And of course, it kind of helps, Colossus's actions in this make more sense as well. Excalibur, it was Warren Ellis, and I liked seeing Nightcrawler being a little bit more aggressive, a little more cold. I enjoyed that iteration of the character. I think it suffered a little bit from the art, and it brought in aspects of like X-Men tropes, like the Savage Land. Just, you're going to have those questions. If you're an X-Men fan, you're going to have a lot of, well, what about this? What about the Savage Land? What about the Shi'ar Empire? That's where Externals and Excalibur kind of play a role into incorporating all of the X-Men world into it. Factor X and Weapon X, I think, are actually 2 of the most easily skipped ones, to be quite honest. And you don't want to skip Weapon X because it's Wolverine and the Adam Kubert art in it, of course, great to look at and absorb. But other than Factor X, you kind of get the Dark Beast in it. But I don't think the Cyclops Havoc story is particularly integral to the overall thing. They could show up and just be cameos at the end of this, and it would have been fine. So oddly enough, I don't think the Wolverine title or the Cyclops title were particularly important to the larger narrative of the event. So there you have it. I think if you're going to read this in like omnibus or collected editions and they collect those prequel stories, just skip that stuff. Jump right in at X-Men Alpha, read through the event to the end, and I think it'll be pretty satisfying overall. Where would I put this as far as like the greatest X-Men stories? I think this was such an ambitious event that I hold it in high regard for that. There was a lot being juggled here, a lot of writers and artists all working on it. So it's not going to be perfect in a lot of ways. I think something like Days of Future Past, that's just a nice, tight story told in 2 issues, that is like perfect. But because this is so big and sprawling, it gets a little wonky in places. And I feel that way about a lot of the X-Men events once Claremont is gone from the books. I think he was the glue that kind of held all that continuity together, even when other writers were working on it. So, I put this probably as like my fourth favorite X-Men event, maybe. But I think it's one of the biggest just because of the way it changed how these things were done. And even though a couple of the characters are going to jump into the main timeline and cause some problems for the main timeline X-Men going forward, I don't think it's like an integral story to the larger mythos of X-Men in the same way that something like the Phoenix Saga or Days of Future Past or Mutant Massacre, like those are the core events that shape the X-Men, and this one feels kind of like a side story, a very fun one, but a side story nonetheless. So that's it for the Age of Apocalypse. I'm going to be taking a little break from this era of X-Men on the channel for a while, but I'll be back. I want to cover some Joe Mad issues, and I think somebody in the comments suggested that they might want to see a little bit of the next event, which is Onslaught. So I hope you enjoyed it. Happy 30th anniversary, Age of Apocalypse. I'm going to pack you back up and hopefully still be around in 30 more years to look at you again. Until next time, read your comics. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed my breakdown of this issue, you can support the channel by hitting subscribe. It costs you nothing and helps other comic fans find the channel. You can also visit readyourcomics.com for cool merch, like this. Read Your Comics isn't just a brand, it's a mantra. And when you wear a Read Your Comics shirt, you are helping spread the word. For more classic comics conversation, be sure to follow me on Instagram at read.your.comics. And if you're still here, why not watch one of my older videos? Here or here.